My childhood friend demanded my husband's fatherhood by contract surrogacy. Then I discovered their plan behind my back. My name is Allison Jackson, and this is the complete account of how my childhood friend conspired with my husband to fulfill her dream of motherhood by a secret contract of surrogacy. It is the story of my discovery, my anguish, and my ultimate choice in the face of betrayal. This narrative is not brief. It spans the years of my friendship with a woman I considered my sister, the building of my marriage to a man I trusted above all else, and the unraveling of everything when I stumbled upon their hidden agreement. I am writing this entirely from my point of view, in the hope that the details will warn others never to ignore their instincts, and never to underestimate what someone might do when desperation or obsession leads them astray. I have chosen to give all the details, from how I met my friend in elementary school to the final confrontation that forced me to question whether I could salvage any part of my life. It is a long, winding story. I will do my best to recount it faithfully, never resorting to parentheses or other extraneous symbols, simply telling the story in my own words. I grew up in a quiet suburb outside Houston, Texas, where houses sat on tree-lined streets and everyone seemed to know each other. My parents, Robert and Linda, were modest folks who cared deeply about community and generosity. I was their only child, which might be why I bonded so strongly with Hannah Miller, the girl who moved in next door when we were both 6 years old. Hannah had come from California, a place I imagined as glamorous. She was shy at first, but we became inseparable within weeks, riding our bikes together, eating peanut butter sandwiches in her backyard, whispering secrets about the stray cats that roamed our neighborhood. I cannot recall a time in my childhood when Hannah was not by my side. We stayed close through junior high and high school. While I gravitated toward writing and literature, Hannah was fascinated by science. We often talked about our futures, how we would attend the same college if possible, how we would remain best friends forever. She was always protective of me, and I of her. My parents saw her almost as a second daughter. Her own mother was an overworked single parent, so she spent many nights sleeping over at my house. We confided in each other about crushes, about heartbreak. I never suspected that one day, she would betray me in a way I found unimaginable. We both got into different universities, though they were in the same state, so we were still able to see each other on weekends. I studied English at a liberal art school, while Hannah focused on biology at a research-oriented campus. Despite the distance, we kept up our bond, sharing life updates, visiting each other's dorms. Over time, I made new friends, and so did she, but we always considered ourselves best friends. At 21, Hannah told me she was uncertain about whether she wanted children in the future. She had developed a condition that might complicate pregnancy. That was the first time I heard her express worry about her fertility. I comforted her, telling her that medicine was advancing, that there were many options if she decided to be a mother someday. She gave me a grateful hug. Little did I know how that topic would later spiral into my nightmare. Shortly after college, I met David on a random blind date arranged by one of my new colleagues. David was charming, stable, had a good sense of humor, and worked as a software designer. We clicked almost immediately. The more I learned about him, the more I fell in love with his calm nature and supportive manner. We dated for a couple of years. During that time, Hannah was traveling a lot, working as a lab assistant in different states. She would call me occasionally, though less frequently. I assumed she was just busy. After all, we were adults forging separate paths. Still, I loved Hannah like a sister, so I updated her whenever something big happened, such as me deciding to accept a job in a marketing firm that better suited my writing talents, or me moving in with David. She usually responded with a friendly but distant warmth. I shrugged it off as part of adulthood. We cannot remain as entwined as we were in childhood. When David proposed to me at 26, I was ecstatic. I phoned Hannah to tell her the news. She reacted with joy, said she would absolutely attend our wedding. I was relieved. I worried that maybe we had drifted too far apart, but her excitement for me seemed genuine. My wedding was a modest affair in the same suburb where I grew up, with friends and family from both sides. Hannah arrived the day before, giving me a huge hug, telling me how proud she was to see me so happy. She confided that her own relationships never lasted because men often balked at the possibility that she might struggle to conceive or might not want kids. I told her not to fret, that true love would appear for her too. She gave me a mysterious smile, as though she had her own secret plans for motherhood. David and I married and started our new life in a different part of Houston, a bit closer to his job. I remained working for the marketing firm, writing content and managing campaigns. We discussed children as a possibility someday. Hannah, for her part, visited us a few times in that first year of our marriage, occasionally staying for dinner, praising how David and I seemed like a great match. I introduced her to David as my childhood friend who was practically family. I recall how David and Hannah got along fine, though it was never anything unusual. She was polite, asked about his work, joked about our old times. She told me her own health remained stable but uncertain. She might or might not be able to conceive. I expressed sympathy. She waved it off, saying science had new ways, that maybe surrogacy was an option. She sounded oddly fixated on the topic. I told her it was definitely an option if she found the right scenario. We parted ways with me feeling a twinge of sadness that my best friend was so worried about fertility issues. 2 years into my marriage, David and I started saving for a house. Our small apartment was fine, but we dreamed of a yard, maybe a place for future children if we decided to have them. Meanwhile, Hannah popped in and out of my life. Sometimes months would pass without contact. Then she would call saying she was in town. Could we meet? She often asked me about David, how his job was going, if we had decided to have kids yet. I found it curious that she was so interested, but I explained that David and I were taking our time, not feeling rushed. She nodded absent-mindedly as though storing away that information. Looking back, I wonder if she was shaping some plan as early as then. One evening, out of nowhere, Hannah called to say she had an exciting new position in a medical research lab and that she might be settling permanently in Houston. I rejoiced, telling her I was thrilled to have her nearby again. She came to dinner at our place, looked around at the walls, asked if we had considered having a child soon. I repeated that we were still waiting for the right moment. Hannah gave me that mysterious smile again. She asked if I would support her if she decided on surrogacy for herself. I replied, of course, I'd support anything that made her happy. She nodded, then changed the subject. I did not think much of it, just assumed she might hire some random surrogate if she found a suitable father or used a donor. The idea that she might want my husband never crossed my mind. Over the months that followed, I became busy with a big project at work. David was also putting in extra hours trying to snag a promotion. Hannah and I texted occasionally. She asked how David was, and if we had free time for coffee. Sometimes, David met her if I was at the office because she said she needed advice on a website for her lab. I found it nice that they got along. David told me Hannah was always brainstorming about new medical breakthroughs. I had no inkling that anything suspicious was brewing. One weekend, while cleaning the study, I stumbled on a folder that contained some odd notes about surrogacy laws. They were printed materials, references to legal constraints in Texas, something about paternal rights. Surprised, I confronted David, asking if he was researching surrogacy for us. He looked flustered, said that Hannah had asked him for help understanding the laws since she was exploring the idea of surrogacy. I shrugged, though it felt odd that my husband was so involved. He assured me it was purely to help Hannah, no big deal. I believed him. After all, I trusted Hannah. We had decades of friendship behind us. A few weeks later, I noticed Hannah was spending more time dropping by unannounced, often when I was out. I discovered this by spotting items in the trash or by my neighbors remarking that they saw Hannah's car in front of our home. I asked David what was going on. He said she was working on a project with him, that it involved a website or a contract she needed him to read. I was uneasy, but I did not want to be a paranoid spouse. I told myself I'd known Hannah all my life. She was not a threat. Yet something began gnawing at me. I tried ignoring it. It was a random Tuesday, late in the afternoon, when I left work early because of a canceled meeting. I arrived home, noticing Hannah's car parked out front. I walked in quietly, expecting to greet them. The door from our living room to the study was partially closed, so I approached. Through the opening, I heard Hannah telling David in a low voice that the contract needed to be finalized soon. That time was running if they wanted to ensure a pregnancy. My breath caught. Pregnancy. Contract. I froze, listening. David murmured that he was not sure this was a good idea anymore, that it was risky. Hannah insisted she had everything arranged, that they just needed him to sign. She said once I discovered it, I'd have no choice but to accept. David hesitated, saying we were borderline deceiving me. Hannah retorted that I'd never freely agree, that I'd always insisted on waiting, so this was the only path. I stood there, trembling, realizing they were talking about fatherhood. Possibly Hannah wanted David to father her child through surrogacy. My heart pounded. I'd never felt such betrayal. I could not stand it any longer, so I pushed the door open, demanding an explanation. Hannah jumped, eyes wide. David paled, stammering. I asked them both what was going on. Hannah tried to speak calmly, as if I was overreacting. She admitted that yes, she had drawn up a contract for surrogacy with David, that she had reasoned it out. She wanted my husband's genetic material for her own baby. She insisted I should not be upset, that it was purely clinical, that no physical affair was planned. I could not believe what I was hearing. I stared at David, tears in my eyes, asking him if he had truly considered fathering Hannah's child behind my back. He muttered that Hannah was desperate, that she confided in him about her medical condition, that she could not easily conceive naturally, so she needed a guaranteed father figure. She had no stable partner, he said, so she asked him. I demanded why they had not told me. Hannah said they assumed I would sabotage it or say no. I nearly screamed that of course I'd say no, that it was insane for my best friend to recruit my husband as a father. Hannah argued that it was not insane, that many surrogacy contracts exist where the father is known, that no physical intimacy was required, just IVF or a similar process. She claimed it was no different than a sperm donation. My mind reeled. She had the nerve to call it a simple transaction. My own husband, the man I'd married, had been colluding with her for months to father her baby behind my back. I felt nauseous, demanded David tear up any contract. He blurted out that he had not signed yet, that he was debating. Hannah insisted we could talk it through. I lost all composure, shouting that she was not welcome in my house again. Hannah glared, telling me I'd never understand. She left. David tried to calm me, but I was past reason. I told him I might never forgive this betrayal. He claimed it was never a betrayal, that he was doing a favor for a desperate friend, that he planned to tell me eventually. I sobbed that I'd known Hannah all my life, that she was like a sister, and now she had tried to use my husband to fulfill her childbearing. I demanded David show me the contract. He hesitated, but I insisted. He brought out a folder from the study that contained a surrogacy contract. It outlined a plan for Hannah to pay for IVF. The father would be David, acknowledging paternal rights in some minimal capacity. The contract stated that once the child was born, Hannah would have full custody. David would have no financial obligations, but also no paternal claim. Meanwhile, Hannah pledged to pay David a sum of money for his cooperation, plus a confidentiality clause. My chest tightened reading the lines about my own husband receiving money from my best friend in exchange for fathering her child. David said it was just a draft. I said no wonder they'd kept it secret because it was horrifying. David insisted he had not yet committed. I kicked David out of the house that night, telling him I needed space. He slept at a friend's place. Meanwhile, I raged, calling my parents to sob about the situation. They were stunned, telling me to gather more facts before deciding. The next day, David returned, tearful, apologizing, saying Hannah had manipulated him by playing on his sympathy. She told him that none of her boyfriends wanted the burden of her fertility complications, so she asked David as a friend. David thought maybe it was harmless if done clinically. I asked how he could conceive of going behind my back with her. David said he was a coward, that he dreaded telling me because he assumed I'd never allow it. I said he was correct. I would never allow my husband to father someone else's baby in secret. David asked if there was any scenario I'd consider. I told him absolutely not, it was betrayal. He swore he would cut ties with Hannah, that he would disclaim any further involvement. I told him that if he had even a shred of decency, he would. Part of me loved David enough to consider a path forward, but I was seething with anger. We agreed to go to marriage counseling. Hannah attempted to contact me by text, claiming that she had done nothing wrong, that she was only asking for help from the man who was also her friend. She wrote that I was overreacting, that many wives support their husbands donating sperm to a friend in need. She insisted it was my fault for refusing to talk openly about it. I never replied, too furious to engage. Days later, Hannah appeared at my workplace, waiting near the parking lot. She told me she wanted to explain. I told her there was nothing to explain, that she had gone behind my back plotting a surrogacy contract with my husband. She retorted that she had a right to motherhood, that if I'd been open to discussing it, she would not have gone secretive. I yelled that I'd known her since we were 6, and this was the ultimate betrayal. She coldly said I'd regret pushing her away. I told her to get out of my sight. At marriage counseling, David explained everything to the therapist, describing how Hannah had confided in him about her fertility issues, how she said she needed a father who had good genes, someone she trusted, someone who might remain a paternal figure only on paper. She proposed a contract where they'd use IVF, never physically consummating anything, and no child support from him. The therapist asked if David considered how I'd feel. David admitted he'd been naive. He cried, saying he was afraid I'd say no, but also he pitied Hannah. The therapist asked me if I saw any possibility of repairing my friendship with Hannah. I said not after such deception. The counselor suggested David cut ties with Hannah, focusing on rebuilding trust with me. David agreed, promising me he would never sign that contract. I told him I'd try to forgive, but it would take time. We tried to move on. David blocked Hannah's number, told her not to contact him. For a while, it seemed quiet, but I still felt uneasy. Then I discovered that Hannah had not given up. She started emailing David from new addresses, pleading for him to reconsider. She claimed she had limited time before her fertility issues worsened. She wrote that the money was good, that she would pay him enough to help us buy a house, that we never needed to tell me if I was going to remain so closed-minded. David showed me the emails, said he was ignoring them, that we could get a restraining order if needed. I was relieved that he was being transparent, but the fact that Hannah persisted unnerved me. This was not the friend I remembered from childhood. My parents told me to brace for more drama, but I did not realize how far Hannah was willing to go. She started dropping rumors among our mutual acquaintances that I was refusing to help her have a baby, that I was a selfish friend who always belittled her fertility problems. Some of them believed her or at least questioned me about it. I told them the truth, that she tried to get my husband to impregnate her behind my back. That sounded so wild that some acquaintances thought I was exaggerating. The gossip was stressful, tarnishing my sense of normalcy. One night, David was working late and I was alone at home. There was a knock on the door. I looked through the peephole and saw Hannah standing there with a folder in her hands. My heart pounded with anger. I opened the door a crack, demanded what she wanted. She pushed the folder toward me, saying inside were official documents for a surrogacy contract, along with a note that if David changed his mind, she was ready to proceed. She said I was cruel for denying her this chance. I told her to leave or I'd call the police. She gave me a sad smile, turned, and walked away. I locked the door, shaking. Opening the folder, I saw the same contract I'd glimpsed in David's study, now with new details about a potential embryo transfer date, about a sperm donation from David. She wrote a personal note claiming she had a clinic lined up. My stomach turned. She was obsessed. When David got home, I showed him the folder. He was alarmed. We decided to contact a lawyer about a cease and desist or a restraining order. The lawyer advised we gather all evidence of her harassing attempts and proceed if needed. The next day, David wrote Hannah an email telling her any further contact was unwelcome and might result in legal action. She responded with a short message calling me a controlling wife who could not see the bigger picture, who was letting jealousy ruin a decades-long friendship. I was beyond done. We followed through with filing for a restraining order, presenting the repeated attempts at contract surrogacy, her uninvited visits, and the stress inflicted on me. The court eventually granted a temporary restraining order preventing Hannah from contacting us directly, but we still had to attend a hearing. She did not contest it heavily, so we got a year-long protective order that forced her to stay away from us physically and electronically. I felt some relief, but also heartbreak that my once dear friend was now legally barred from being near me. In the months that followed, David and I slowly reclaimed a semblance of normal life. We purchased a smaller house than we originally planned, ignoring the fiasco with Hannah. We worked on healing the trust in our marriage. David apologized again and again for letting it go so far behind my back. I told him I'd try to forgive, though the pain lingered. Part of me kept replaying childhood memories of Hannah, the sweet girl who was my partner in every childish adventure, and I asked myself how she came to see my husband as a solution for her fertility crisis. But I accepted that time changes people. I decided I could not keep mourning the friendship we had. Hannah had chosen her path. Occasionally I heard rumors that Hannah was telling acquaintances I was a tyrant, but most people seemed to have moved on. My parents remained supportive. David and I considered having a baby ourselves on our own terms, but we were not quite ready yet. We wanted to wait until the tension had fully died down. Another year passed with no sign of Hannah. The restraining order had kept her away, presumably preventing more attempts. I ran into a mutual friend from high school who said Hannah was pregnant. I felt a jolt of shock. The friend did not know details, only that Hannah had posted on social media about expecting a baby soon, praising a father figure for stepping up. The friend said Hannah implied the father was a friend from childhood who recognized her plight. My heart raced. Could it be that David secretly fathered the child behind my back after all? I confronted David, but he denied it emphatically, saying he had no part in it. He pointed out we had the restraining order plus no contact. He said maybe Hannah found someone else or used a donor. I breathed relief. For the next few months, I tried to ignore the ongoing swirl of gossip. Then rumors spread that the father was not around after all, that Hannah was alone but financially stable. People hinted she had received a large sum from somewhere. I did not dare let my mind wander too far, but the suspicion gnawed at me. Did she find a different friend from our youth? Did she manipulate some stranger? My heartbreak had begun to fade, so I refused to let Hannah's baby storyline ruin my attempts at peace. David told me to stop letting Hannah occupy space in my mind. Time marched on. Another year passed. By then, David and I had decided we were ready to start our own family. The experiences with Hannah ironically strengthened our resolve to do it the right way, with mutual agreement, no secrets. I got pregnant and we were thrilled. My parents celebrated the news. We were in the second trimester, happily preparing for parenthood, when I received a letter in the mail from Hannah. My name was on the envelope, no return address. Inside, she wrote that she had given birth months ago to a boy named Ethan, that he was perfect, and that I should know that all my meddling did not stop her. She never mentioned David. She ended by stating that one day, truth would come out about who fathered her baby. My hands shook reading it. David insisted it was just a final jab. We tried to dismiss it, but as my pregnancy progressed, I realized I needed closure. I told David that if he had any secrets left about Hannah, he should come clean. He repeated that he had never gone through with donating sperm, never agreed to father her child. I believed him, wanting to trust him fully. The birth of our daughter, whom we named Lily, was a joyous moment overshadowed only slightly by memories of the fiasco with Hannah. We immersed ourselves in caring for our newborn, sleeping in shifts, learning how to be parents. Life felt complete in a way. I thought we had left Hannah's drama behind for good. Then Lily was about 4 months old, and I was at home when I got an unexpected visit from a process server who handed me documents. They were from Hannah. She was filing some sort of motion about paternal acknowledgement, listing me and David as interested parties. My heart pounded. The documents claimed that Hannah had reason to believe David was the biological father of her son, Ethan, and she was seeking formal recognition or, ironically, a statement disclaiming paternal rights. I nearly collapsed reading it. David came home, found me in tears. I showed him the documents. He was speechless, cursing that Hannah had stooped to a new low. We contacted a lawyer, baffled as to how she could claim David fathered her child if we never agreed, never gave sperm or anything. Our lawyer suggested we do a DNA test to prove David was not the father. We filed a response, stating that David had never participated in any procedure with Hannah. The case was set to go to a hearing, though it was unclear what evidence Hannah had. The day of the hearing arrived. I was anxious, leaving Lily with my parents. David and I went to the courthouse, accompanied by our lawyer. Hannah was there, looking poised, holding a baby boy of about a year old. I tried not to look, but curiosity overcame me. The baby was adorable, with big brown eyes. Hannah gave me a cold stare. We sat, waiting for the judge. The hearing was short, with Hannah alleging that David fathered Ethan through a surrogacy arrangement or donor process, and that David had subsequently refused to sign the final contract. She insisted she had emails and partial documents that proved David intended to be the father. Our lawyer argued that intent is irrelevant if no procedure took place. The judge ordered a DNA test to settle the matter. I saw Hannah smirk. I felt dread, remembering all the attempts at forging documents. Could she have found a way to forge DNA results? The judge gave us a date and told us to comply with official testing at a recognized lab. We went for the official test, with a court-appointed representative supervising the swabs from David and Ethan. A month later, the results came back. My heart hammered as we opened them. By the grace of all sense, it concluded David was not the biological father. I exhaled relief. We gave the result to the court. The court dismissed Hannah's claim. She stood there, expression unreadable, then left abruptly with her baby. We never talked. We left the courthouse in tears of relief. David told me that must be the final blow, that she had no more illusions. I asked him if there was any chance the procedure had occurred without his knowledge. He said absolutely not. We had the restraining order. We never gave in to anything. Possibly she found another man, or maybe a clinic that used a random donor. The baby was not David's. End of story. Time after that was calmer. We heard no more from Hannah. She vanished from social media, though occasionally I'd see a distant mutual acquaintance mention her baby. David and I put all the heartbreak behind us, focusing on raising Lily. The next year we moved to a new city for David's job. There we found real healing. I wrote a personal journal about all that had happened, never expecting I'd share it publicly. But as Lily grew, I started thinking about how I'd tell her that I'd faced betrayal from a friend and overcame it with honesty and refusal to be coerced. I tried to spin it as a life lesson. We ended up having a second child, our son Jacob, a few years later. Life was happy. We were forging a strong, stable family. The fiasco with Hannah felt like a distant storm that had once threatened everything. Sometimes I dream about that childhood friendship, the bike rides and sleepovers, feeling a pang of sorrow that she changed so drastically. I still do not fully understand her motives. Perhaps she believed that since we always shared everything, she was entitled to my husband's fatherhood. Or maybe she simply saw him as a stable genetic father for her child, and she was desperate to have a baby at any cost. The older I got, the more I realized that people can justify anything when they want something badly enough. That is my entire story from beginning to end, about how my childhood friend demanded my husband's fatherhood by contract surrogacy, planning it all behind my back. I discovered their plan accidentally, overhearing them, tore my world apart for a time. I confronted them, refused to accept any so-called arrangement, and forced David to choose transparency and loyalty to me. Hannah tried to push forward, hammered him with repeated attempts. We even had to get a restraining order. Eventually, she had a baby fathered by someone else or by some unknown method, then tried to claim it was David's, only to be disproven by a court-supervised DNA test. The entire ordeal was painful, but I emerged stronger, certain that a friend who would stoop so low was never truly a friend. In the end, my marriage survived because David recognized his mistake and cut ties with her. We now live free of that toxic presence, raising our children in peace. I share this story in detail to show that betrayal can come from the person you trust most. My friend since age 6 manipulated my husband, wrote up a contract, intended to use his sperm to conceive, and planned to pay him for fatherhood, all while excluding me. The heartbreak I felt is indescribable. Yet if there's a moral, it is that confronting betrayal head-on, demanding honesty, can be the path to healing. My husband and I overcame it by refusing to keep secrets. As for Hannah, I can only hope she finds some measure of redemption in her own life. But she will never again be my friend, nor a part of my children's lives. That innocence we once shared on tree-lined streets is gone forever, replaced by caution and a reminder that sometimes the people we hold dearest can cause the deepest wounds.